Elevate yourself. Empower others. Welcome to Coach Approach Podcast. Welcome back to Coach Approach. Today I'm joined by John K. Bates, leadership communications coach, pitch coach, and one of the most prolific TED format coaches out there. John's core idea is simple and brutal. It's not about what you say, it's about what you hear. And he teaches his through neurobiology how humans actually decide, trust, and follow. John, welcome to Coach Approach.
Thank you, Marco. I love that you started with that. It's not about what I say, it's about what you hear. That's the measure of communication, I think.
Most people try to win on logic, but humans don't move logically, they move biologically. John, your headline is also emotional credibility. In plain language, what is it and why is the missing ingredient for most leaders?
So, this is a great question. I so I work with a lot of people who are already established. I work with some
Mhm.
people who are not, but I work with a lot of people who are already established. They're a VP at a big global organization. They own a company, that kind of thing. They're a keynote speaker who's traveling the world giving their speeches. And it's funny because even when I go into some place like General Electric Aerospace or Johnson and Johnson at the very highest levels, and I say to people, okay, well, so we're going to do this speech, and I know that you want it to be TED worthy. So what is it that you want to accomplish with this speech? What is it you need to say? And people will say some version, very often, they'll say some version of, well, I want to establish my credibility first. And I'm like, okay, no, we don't need to do that anymore. It says VP of whatever on your card from this huge company, and you've been given the stage. So your credibility is already assumed. What we need to do really is establish your emotional credibility. Why are you the person that we can trust with this and that we can believe will care about this enough to keep going through something difficult? And or how did you come to be this person? What is your background? What led to this? How can we connect with you and trust you? And that's much more important at that stage than establishing your credibility.
What does it sound or feel like when someone has emotional credibility?
Well, I I think that one of the best ways. So let me answer your question, and then I'll give you a way to think about how to really deeply establish it. When someone has emotional credibility, it means that I feel like I know a little bit about how they think, something that's relevant about how they think. So let's say that you're my boss and you've got a team here. And so when you establish emotional credibility with us, it means that we understand how you think. We
Mm.
understand what motivates you. We understand why you care so much. We know you care, right? You tell us you care, but why? Oh, we understand why and how you think, things like that, then it becomes much easier for us to want to follow you and to be loyal to you and to trust you. And I think that one of the things that's missing, one of the big ingredients that's very scary, and so it's missing for a lot of leaders, is that one of the best ways to establish emotional credibility is to share a meaningful story that vulnerability, which is scary, right? Because vulnerability is scary. And when I work with people and I talk about, okay, well, I need you to be a little bit vulnerable in this speech because you're the boss and they all think you have something that they don't. And, you're in this position that's very, very important and has a lot of responsibility. How can they connect with you? Well, a great way is through sharing some vulnerability. But then people say, but John, I mean, what's too much vulnerability? How do I know where the line? So, okay, here's a great way. Insightful vulnerability. If you failed at something and learned an important lesson, which I think by this time we all have, if you share that story and you let us know, like, man, I was really embarrassed. I mean, I couldn't believe I had failed like that, but here's what it taught me.
Mm.
Oh, now we're like, okay, what? What did it teach you? We want to know, right? And when you tell us where you failed and what it taught you, instead of thinking, oh, what a loser, what a failure, we don't think that at all. We think, wow, that Marco guy is really self-aware. And it's a totally different experience. So insightful vulnerability. If you don't have a great insight yet, then maybe it's time to still talk about it with your therapist. But once you've got the insight and you've been through the thing and you've worked it out, boy, share that. You know, I mean, Marco, I raised several $100 million in Silicon Valley and beyond with my teams. One of the biggest failures out of that time was I had a company with three other guys called bigwords.com, and we raised over $80 million and then went out of business in the dot-com crash. And I was so upset and I was so horrified and I felt so awful and I almost died of an autoimmune disease. But then one day it dawned on me, okay, when I was a little kid and I sang in a chorus, our teacher, it was called Glee, right? The Glee chorus. When I sang in that chorus, when we would go to perform, the teacher would always say, okay, kids, it's okay if you make a mistake, just make it loud. Right.
Mm.
And I was like, one day it dawned on me like, wow, I made a mistake and it was loud, like $80 million loud. But at least I made a mistake loud. At least I wasn't doing something small when I
Mm.
failed, right? And at that
Yeah.
moment, I had a big insight that was my insight. And all of a sudden, what I realized is, oh, I have a failure. Because before that moment, I had been thinking I am a failure. No, 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 no. I'm not a failure. I have a failure. And the minute I had the failure didn't have me. Right. And that's a super embarrassing thing that I lost $80 million. Like it still makes me sick to my stomach. People who invest in an,
Hmm.
I learned a lesson and I'm going to share, you know?
It can make a great impact on your employees, on the people in your team. When we talk about leadership, you talk about leadership as a function of communication. If that's true, what are two, three communication behaviors that separate elite leaders from average ones?
So, that first one that we started with, that you started with, that I love that you started with is that, I mean, I've been a leader for a long time because I'm an old guy. And I remember early on in my leadership journey, I was really interested in checking the box, I told you so.
Hmm.
Oh, you should have listened to me. I told you so. Right. And I thought that was great if I got to check the box, I told you so. And then one day it dawned on me that every time I checked the box, I told you so, we didn't get what we wanted. It means we didn't get what we wanted. I didn't get what I wanted, but I did get to check the box, I told you so. Not as good as getting what I wanted. And so I started really focusing on how can I be responsible for what they hear? How can I check the box? I landed it over there, right? So that I wouldn't have to check the box, I told you so later, right? Because if I told you so and it still didn't work, then so what? Right? Like I wanted to check the box. I landed it over there. So we started accomplishing our goals. And that changed things dramatically for me. So that's one thing that I think leaders that are successful do. I also think that leaders there's a certain level of leadership where you can get to that level of leadership, and it's a pretty high level of leadership by just being very logical, being a good communicator, being good at your job, that kind of stuff. But then past that level, maybe VP or even a little lower in some companies, above that level, you've got to be able to tell great business stories, like stories that illustrate a point and that connect people to you and that let people know how you think and let people know who you are in a way that they can, uh, you know, imitate if they want and learn from if they're willing. And, I got brought in to work at Intuit, the big company Intuit that does all, like QuickBooks and stuff. And they had a guy who was at VP level, and the woman who ran HR at Intuit said, John, he's super, super good at his job, and everybody on his team loves him. And already a very good communicator, like he does well on stage and things. But we want to move him into the C level of the whole organization. And right now, all those things are true, but people don't feel like they know him very well. He holds his cards really close to his chest, and he's not really a good storyteller, and he's not, letting people know who he is. And we can't promote him to the next level unless he can do that. And so that's what we worked on. And that I think is another incredibly important piece of leadership, is to be able to tell great stories, not great stories that like put little kids to sleep. I'm talking about great stories that convey the principles of the company and that convey your values and that teach important lessons to your team. I think those stories are the myths that create the mythology that is company culture. So that's two. And then I think a third one would be just remembering that we all have mirror neurons there, which are neurons inside our bodies that resonate when we see someone go through an experience. So if someone walks in the room and they're really happy, what's going on? But we're already happy because they're happy. We're mirroring them. And if they walk in sad, and and you know, all of us are fine again, but everywhere they go, they think everybody's grumpy, right? So that's mirror neurons. And as a leader, it's just really important to remember that they are always mirroring you. So the short, easy coaching, well, the short, simple coaching is give them something good to mirror. And as you know, when you take that on as a leader, all of a sudden, if things are not going the way you want them to go and things aren't great and people aren't getting great results, well, yes, look over there, see if someone's doing something wrong and help them do it right. But the other big question great leaders ask is, oh, how could I give them something even better to mirror? How am I showing up in those bad results? And what do I need to change over here so they can get better results?
We call Steve Jobs natural communicator because maybe we don't want to work like he did.
You're so right.
That Steve Jobs example is a little bit wild, but practicing an hour per minute. What does that teach us about natural talent versus trained mastery?
Well, I think it's a great question. And I think that it goes back to, the neuroscience and the neurobiology of human beings. We're the only animals who don't have real instincts. I mean, like, we don't like heights when we're little kids, like, we're afraid of heights, so we don't fall off stuff, but we really don't have many instincts. And I very strongly disagree that people are naturally born anything. You know, they may have a little bit of a tendency towards something, or maybe because when they were little, they did something early and they got kind of good at it just because they did it. But I don't think there's any such thing as a natural communicator or a natural speaker or a natural leader. I think all that stuff is learned. And so, Steve Jobs, after they created the talk, which took a long time, would practice for an hour for every minute that he was going to be on stage. So imagine that 45-minute talk he gave, he practiced for 45 hours on the stage, looking out at the empty auditorium, imagining the people in the seats and talking to them and delivering that talk just how he wanted it to go. And he did really well, you know. But I mean, anybody would do really well if they practiced for 45 hours. They might not be as good as some other people, but anybody who practiced a speech for 45 hours, really, it would be a good speech. They would do a good job, you know. And he stole that from Winston Churchill, who also did that.
What's the minimum effective practice for an executive who has no time, let's say?
Okay, it's a fair question. So, look, it depends on how much it matters, right? But I like to think about when I'm speaking, if I'm speaking for, like, let's say I'm doing a TED-like talk or a TED talk, and I'm speaking for 20 minutes to 3,000 people. That's 6,000 minutes of human life. Divide by 60, and we get 1,000 hours of human life that I'm responsible for in one 20-minute talk to 3,000 people, right? And when the CEO gets the whole company in a room for an hour, I mean, we're still paying everybody's wages, right? We're still paying rent on the building. We're still paying all that stuff. That hour better be worthwhile, right? It better, otherwise it's a big waste of money, right? So I think people forget that delivery is part of their job too. I like to say, and I'll get to the minimum practice in a second. I like to say, yipe, your impression equals your performance, which is all the hard work you're doing, multiplied by your exposure moment, times exposure. So if you're doing $1 million work, but your performance or your exposure moment is a 0.5, well, now you're doing $500,000 work. But if you're doing $1 million work and your exposure moment is a 10, well, now you're doing $10 million work, right? And what you're doing didn't change, just that exposure moment changed. So I think that if it matters at all, doing something out loud 3 times is enormously helpful, because the first time you do it out loud, and it doesn't count if you're just doing it in your head, that just doesn't work for some reason. So it doesn't count. So, but when you do it out loud, even if it's quietly out loud, but just under, but you got to move those vocal cords, right? It has to be out loud somewhat. The first time you realize, oh, that's not exactly what I wanted to say. The second time, you'll probably realize, oh, there's some rough transitions that I'm not quite clear on. And then the third time through, after you figured out what you want to say and you've gotten clear about the transitions, that third time through will be about 1,000 times better than the first time through. And then what I've noticed, Marco, is I used to avoid practicing much more than that because I was afraid it was going to make me sound robotic and rehearsed, and it would be too, well, okay, that happens, right? You practice so much it looks like you practiced. And then there's this thing that I call the Valley of Awkwardness, in honor of Chris Anderson of TED, where you practiced so much and it looks like you practiced. And that's not the goal. That's kind of weird and robotic. But then there comes this point when you practice even more that you get across the Valley of Awkwardness to the point where you practiced so much that it looks like you didn't practice. And that's why so many people think Steve Jobs has something they don't have. Because I swear there are a lot of people who subconsciously believe, maybe if you ask them, they wouldn't say this, but subconsciously they're acting like Steve Jobs just gets up and wings that. He's so good, he just gets up and wings it. No, he does not just get up and wing it, right? And but that's how I did a lot of my speeches in the early days, was winging it. And then I realized I was getting uneven results, and I went to TED and had this whole discovery of how much practice matters. And now I practice so much it looks like I didn't practice.
Mhm. In all that, story is the superpower. Logic is necessary, but it's not sufficient.
That's right.
Story carries emotion, identity, and meaning.
Yes.
So, what do most smart people get wrong about storytelling, especially technical founders and executives?
Oh, you're asking good questions, Marco. I am very impressed with your preparation, by the way. I feel honored that you would take enough time with my material to ask these great questions. Um, so here's the number one problem. The number one problem with storytelling. Well, first of all, maybe the number one problem is that most people don't use stories, right? And it's the stories are the most effective tool for communicating with human beings that we have, because that's how everything of importance came to us all throughout history, is through stories, right? And songs, but songs are subsets of stories, because we didn't have writing for most of our history. So in order to remember anything complex, it had to be in the form of a story, and that's how we would be able to remember it. And that's why our brains more highly value story than anything else. So the first biggest mistake is not using stories, right? And so here's a great saying from Les Brown: never tell a story without a point, and never make a point without a story that illustrates that point, right? You tell us the story that illustrates the point, and then tell us the point again to make sure we get it. But then if people do start using stories, the first biggest mistake in storytelling is telling us the whole story, right? Like, don't tell us the whole story, please, right? We just need to know the parts that matter to us, right? And, Marco, the other day, what city, what's the capital city where you are?
Zagreb.
Yeah, Zagreb. I was out in Zagreb with my wife a few years ago, and we went to this amazing restaurant. And I think it was Monday. No, it might have been maybe it was the weekend. Could I don't care, right? I don't
Yeah,
care
yeah,
what night it was. Tell me where you went and what kind of food was it? And it was so good. Why was it so good, right? Like, we don't need to know what night it was unless that really matters. So I like the idea of curating the important pieces into the story, and then we only need to know that. And if there were a bunch of people there, okay, you can say there were a bunch of people there, and I'm sure Marco was there. But I don't know whoever, but there were a bunch of people, but Marco was there. Okay, because Marco matters to the story. Everybody else, it's nice they were there, but we don't have to worry about everybody's name and everything, right? So I give people, when they work with me, and I could give your audience right now for free, their own poetic license. So here we go. By the powers vested in me as an ordained priest in the Church of the Latter Day Dude, I bestow upon you your poetic license. So if you just heard that, you now have your poetic license. We'll store it in the cloud for you. It'll be there forever, and you don't have to tell the whole story, right? In
Mhm.
fact, please don't tell the whole story. Just give us the parts that matter. And how I say that, Marco, is just give us the treats, right? We
Mhm.
just want to know where the treats are, right? We don't need to know everything else.
If someone wants a TED-worthy talk or pitch, what are the non-negotiables in craft, model, and delivery?
So I'll go backwards.
Okay.
I think that the non-negotiable in delivery is to practice it.
Okay.
And make sure that you are comfortable in delivering it, because otherwise your body is going to telegraph that you're uncomfortable and they're going to think you're lying to them about what you're telling them, right? So to get to the point where you can deliver it confidently and, you know, as it's not just about me, but for, work with me or work with someone else. But I think it's really important to get a coach for these things because it's hard to see the picture when you're in the frame. It's hard
Hmm.
for me to see the picture for my things. I'm working on a keynote and I got help from one of the greatest in the world, right? I'm not going to try and do that all by myself. It's hard to see the picture when you're in the frame, right? So I think it's good to get a coach and be coachable. That's how
Hmm.
everybody that's good at things did it, right? Tiger Woods had multiple coaches. None of them could beat him at golf, but together, because he was coachable, they had him beat everybody for what seemed like forever, right? So, so practice for delivery, and then in terms of the the rest of it, I think that here's a super good secret that I think most people do not know because I work with a lot of people and almost never do I see this. When you put together that pitch and you're out raising money or you want people to do something, weave in your origin story, weave that into the problem statement, right? Like if you're going to go out and pitch, let's say to raise money for your new startup, you've got to have a problem statement in the deck. You got to tell us what the problem is that you're going to solve. So that's already in there. If you weave in the story of how you came to find out about this problem and how you came to care about this problem, that will make that whole thing much more emotionally connected. And when we get to the end and you ask for the money, they're going to be much more likely to give it to you because of that emotional connection that they feel like they know you, they feel like they understand why you care, why you'll keep going even if things get tough, right? And then the other thing that I think people don't think about enough that has great benefits is to think about how can you structure whatever you're going to say in a way that's going to make it more interesting and maybe even make it surprising and give people a paradigm shift and things like that. Because there's a lot you can do with just how you structure things to make what you're saying much more interesting or yeah, much less interesting, and we want it to be more interesting.
Yeah, you gave great advices for founders pitching products. And a vision isn't powerful because it's true. It's powerful when it's understood. So when we pitch a product that's complicated, it needs to be understood in 60 seconds.
Yeah.
And we have an audience, what is the audience is skeptical. So how we build trust when the audience is skeptical?
Well, that is why it's so important to be able to build in your origin story and really
Okay.
tell us honestly, where do you come from and why do you care about this and how did you notice this problem and what made right? And so often I work with people, like I was working with this one guy, and this is a very common type of thing. And I do a lot of pitch coaching in the biomedical space, right?
Mhm.
And the medical devices space. And this guy had a medical device that was going to help people in this like later stage of like heart failure. And it took me about 20 minutes of grilling this guy to finally find out and have him tell me that this is what his father had died of. And it was so awful watching his father die of this that he decided he was going to do something about it. And I'm like, okay, like, why wouldn't you tell me that right in the beginning?
Yeah.
Why did I have to dig that out of you? And there's and it's always something like that, Marco. And it's really interesting to know why. So think about this. all the people who are listening to us right now, everyone, they are smart, brilliant people. You are a smart person and you have options. There is no one that is doing a startup because it's the only thing they could do, right? They could go get a job somewhere else. There's nobody who's in a high position at a company as an executive who's there because it's the only thing they could do, right? They could go someplace else, they could do something else. And so when you are doing something like that, it's because it's the thing that you're most passionate about. You're doing this podcast not because you don't have other things to do. You're doing this podcast because it inspires you and you want to connect with people and you want to make this great content available to people. And so when you get in touch with why you're so passionate about this, that's really, really great information to share because then people will know why you're so passionate. They'll connect to you and it establishes that emotional credibility, right? So building that into everything that you do, whether you're pitching your company or talking to your team or trying to bring on a new partner or do a joint venture, everybody would benefit from knowing that origin story of why you're doing what you're doing and why you're so passionate about this and why would you pick this over all the other things. We don't think about it very often, but every single one of us, we're all giving our lives to something. I'm giving my life to leadership communications, coaching and training. This is what I'm dedicating my life to. And the way you know what you're giving your life to is you look at what are you spending your money and your time on, you know? And for me, it's this business doing this. I do a lot of pro bono work for nonprofits. I bring this any place that I think it can make a difference. I work with top leaders so that I can make a difference through the difference they make. But this is what I give my life to. And then I have my wife and my 9-year-old son. And that's basically it. Like I'm giving my life to this business, my wife and my son, you know, and I'm
Yeah.
clear about that. And I'm okay with that. In fact, I love that. I'm grateful for that. I have a morning and evening gratitude practice where I say thank you for that every day. But here's what's interesting. People love to be around people who are clear that they're giving their life to something and who are passionate about doing it. People love to be around that.
Hmm. Yeah, because that's the highest source of energy when you know the
Yeah.
why.
Yeah.
Uh, can we talk a little bit about earned media and being the best kept secret? Uh,
Yes.
why do experts stay the best kept secret, and what's the first move to break that?
So, this became much bigger on my radar system about a year and a half ago when I met my colleague, Mark Albert. And he is a 25-year TV news veteran. He was on CBS News. He ran the investigative journalism department for Hearst. He won Emmy Awards, Peabody Awards. I mean, he was a really big deal here in the United States and reporting from all over the world. And we met and started to talk about what we both did. And I really like him. He really likes me. And we just kind of hit it off and we started talking about this stuff. And as a reporter, he was very frustrated because he wanted to always get new, diverse experts to comment on what was going on in the news, right? So, I mean, Donald Trump has been putting a lot of tariffs on people. So reporters are looking for people who understand tariffs. They want experts who understand international trade and stuff, right? And Mark would always go back to the same people for that kind of stuff because it was so hard to find experts that he knew were going to be good on TV and that he knew would give good sound bites and who would answer the phone right when he called because he was in a hurry. So So we decided we would start MediaMasteryExperts.com to help people who've got an expertise understand the media, understand how, so let me answer your question. Earned media. There are a bunch of different kinds of media. One is bought media, like paid media. And that's when you buy an ad in a newspaper or an ad on a TV show or something, right? That's paid media. You pay for that advertisement. Then there's owned media, which is your website. You own that, your own mailing list, which is really important and people overlook that. Your own mailing list, you own that media, right? And then interestingly enough, this is kind of a new distinction for me. LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, I think of them like rented media because
Mhm.
I don't own that, right? Like LinkedIn could shut me down tomorrow and just say, too bad, John, you know? So I don't own that media. I got almost 30,000 followers there, but I don't own them. So I'm very interested in getting them on my mailing list too, so that I can talk directly to them, even if LinkedIn ever shuts me down, right? Which I hope they never will. But and then there's this other media called earned media, and that is some of the most powerful media on earth. That is when you, as an expert, earn being on a TV news show, or you earn being mentioned in a magazine or a newspaper, right? Or you get on a podcast, right? I'm earning my spot on your podcast by being willing to share my expertise. That's how I'm earning this media, right? So that is some of the best media ever. And even though people say the mainstream media is dying, well, it's not gone yet, right? If
Mm.
you get mentioned on CBS News, Marco, as an expert, and they say, well, Marco from the Coach Approach says blah, 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 right? Marco, what do you think about what's happening today in the coaching space? And you're like, well, let me tell you, that is an amazing opportunity, right? You will get so much traffic and so much attention. And now, forever on, you can say, as seen on CBS News or as seen on,
Mm.
whatever the news program is, and you'll have that video of you being interviewed, and people are going to, oh, he must know what he's talking about, right? So that
Mm.
earned media is very, very powerful and important. And most people have no idea how to get that. And we teach people how to get that. And then we also help them leverage that earned media and that exposure into getting onto more stages and getting paid higher fees to speak. If you're an expert, I think, if you're any good at speaking and you've got an expertise that is in demand, $7,500 is probably the minimum that you're going to charge for a keynote speech. And I work with people who make 25, 35, $50,000 for one speech because they're such experts and they're so good at communicating it and speaking, right? So
Mhm.
that's what we do at Media Mastery Experts, where I work with my colleague, Mark Albert. We help people master their message so that they can deliver it in all these different mediums and it comes across really, really well. And they know what to do on TV. They know what to do on podcasts. They know how to talk to reporters for newspapers and magazines. And then they can amplify their influence by getting that earned media, getting on more stages, all that kind of stuff. But that's something people should think about a lot more, because not like most people are waiting for the news station to call them. And that's not going to happen if they don't know who you are.
Yeah. What should a person do weekly to earn credibility at scale?
I think that's a great question. And I mean, the first place that my mind goes is to LinkedIn.
Hmm.
And I have a little bit of mixed feelings about all these platforms that we don't own. But what I will say is LinkedIn has done, I think, a phenomenal job of being the business place to be, right? Like I'm not I throw up on Facebook. Like I despise what a lot of these social media channels have become. Like X makes me puke. I still put my content out on some of them, but I am active on LinkedIn because I feel like they've done an awesome job at keeping it business-like, right? And that's what I'm there for, and that's what everybody else is there for, and it's awesome. So I think putting out, and LinkedIn is not one of those things like X where you need to post every 5 minutes. Post twice a week, post once a week, and then go make smart comments, meaningful, helpful comments on other people's posts. And that algorithm, what LinkedIn wants to be is a cross between high quality media, right? Like top level magazines and really like The Economist and, that kind of thing. They want that high level content and social media. So on LinkedIn, the goal there is to share your expertise and to put up valuable posts. And when you go comment on other people's posts, make valuable comments. Like it's nice to say, "Oh, good job, Marco." But if I can say, "Wow, Marco, you've really hit on something that I see working a lot in my business. And here's what I think we have in common. This is what works. You're doing it your way. This is another way to do it. Great job." Okay, now that's a much more valuable post, right? And I think that when we work with people, what I was going to say is I think that LinkedIn is very important for experts. When we work with people, one of the first things we do is go to their LinkedIn website, their LinkedIn profile, and make sure that they are establishing themselves as an expert. Like, unless you really are looking for a job, don't make it a job seeking place. Like, don't just put up your resume and I'm looking for a job. If you're an expert and you want to be recognized as an expert, make that LinkedIn profile just exude your expertise. And, people will still hire you because you clearly are an expert. But when people come look at you, when the press wants to reach out to you, Marco, for an interview, they're going to go look at your LinkedIn first. And you don't have to have 1 million followers, but if your LinkedIn doesn't speak directly to who you are and your expertise, then they're probably going to go try and find someone else,
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably one of the easiest, quickest ways to really amplify your perception as an expert is to put expert content onto LinkedIn and make really sure that your LinkedIn profile conveys your expertise.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, John. This was excellent. Tell me, where can people follow your work and go deeper?
One great place is LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn.com and then /John Bates, JOHNBATES. And then if people are looking for me for public speaking and keynoting and things like that, johnbates.com is kind of a website about me as a speaker. And then my company, where I do the vast majority of my work, is Executive Speaking Success, which is kind of a long URL, but it conveys what we do, right? That's where all my coaching programs are, and people can reach out to me there. So I think LinkedIn and johnbates.com and executivespeakingsuccess.com are the best places. And then if you want to see like my morning hikes once in a while, I'm on Instagram for just fun stuff, John K. Bates. So
John, thank you for the wisdom and for the fun. Thank you for being my guest on Coach Approach.
you are super welcome, Marco. It's absolutely a joy. And like we talked about, I appreciate you sharing your platform to help more people hear about what I do. And I certainly hope that I brought value to your listeners.
Thank you very much. Elevate yourself. Empower others. Welcome to Coach Approach Podcast.